All right, hello everybody. For today's video, I wanted to talk a little bit about the most recent episode of the Wordy Pair podcast. We are going to get these from time to time, maybe once a week, because, it's one of those podcasts. It's very hard to actually market a podcast, without I don't know. I guess I'm not a very good marketer to begin with. You can see my book sales for that, but I don't know. With all of these things to do, step one, establish an audience. Step two, create product. And you're like, wait, what? Anyway, today we're going to get into the most recent episode of the Wordy Pair podcast because I think there's a few things that should be said about the topic that we covered. What we talked about was, it was actually a few years ago that this person named Lily Orchard created a list of 101 tips for writing on Twitter or something. There was a massive backlash. She deleted all of them, kind of thing. But somehow a video discussing them ended up in my feed a couple weeks ago, and so me and Justin decided to record an episode going through a few of these. We got through 35 before my soul left my body, and I was like, we have to stop. I can't take any more of this. Because they're just really... they're like painfully self-unaware is the thing about them, right? And so just for the heck of it, I gave them another little look because I wanted to make sure I wasn't crazy. They're still bad. And so you can listen to us riff on these the first 35 rules of this set for an hour and a half if you feel like it. We do a pretty good job of being relatively funny, when I checked them again, I noticed the last one was this. Oh, these are tips, not rules. Lols. I'm paraphrasing, but that's not how English works, right? You can write something and in the form of a tip. The way to write something in the form of a tip is, I really like when character descriptions are concise but give me a few points to hang on so that I can kind of, come up with a visualization of that character in my mind without being so specific that I have to really kind of concentrate on the description. A good example of this would be character descriptions in the Nero Wolfe books. A lot of the time Archie finds some somewhat comical or maybe exaggerated aspect of that character and says, well, this is, this character, he's all about his bald forehead kind of thing. You have Dewdrop Irby, where he's a bald lawyer, where he has sweat on his bald head, but the sweat droplets don't move or get bigger or get smaller. They just all stay in the same place. We have, the Attorney General Jessup in what's it called? Immune to Murder, where he's constantly pushing up his specs over and over again. And eventually Archie gets tired of describing it, says, I will only describe the specs thing every fourth or fifth time he does it. And he's still doing it a lot. That's a tip. Such and such general characteristic will improve the quality of your story for most readers. Now, Lily Orchard's stuff, most of it is not written in that format. Most of it is written in the form of if you do or do not do this thing X, you are a bad person or it is a bad story. That's not the form for a tip. That's the form for a rule. And simply going in at the end and saying, oh, they're tips, not rules, lols, at the end is completely disingenuous. And, it's about what I expect from someone who would come up with this list in the first place. And the other thing is that the list of 101 things is pretty uncreative, actually, because you think, wow, 101 tips for writing, even if they're bad tips, it took a lot of work to actually create 101 of them. No, because 6 or 7 of them just in the first 35, 6 or 7 of them are the same rule over and over again, only with a different a different minority for each rule. And basically all of them could be condensed into, when you create a character, don't make that character simply an expression of a stereotype about that type of character, which that's actually a decent tip, right? First off, if you do that regularly, you're going to end up with a lot of characters that don't have any depth. People are going to notice that. But to simply say, I have this one rule, and I'm going to expand it into 6 or 7 rules by picking a variety of different special groups that have special stereotypes that I want you to specifically avoid, is not particularly useful, and it's not particularly creative either. It means that I took that, you take that 101, and maybe it's only like 60 tips because so many of them are so repetitive compared to, with other ones on the same list. Another thing about the list that really bothered us is that there was like a lot of like gooey adulation for specific series of things, like Avatar or Friends or whatever. It's one of those things where, like, if you don't have a particularly wide set of things that you've like explored and really paid attention to, that like all of your tips come down to, well, they did this on such and such TV show and I liked it, and so therefore that is a tip. Which, again, this is not a particularly good tip because it is an expression of I like X, which is not particularly helpful to hear from a writer. It would be helpful to hear that from a large number of readers, right? Like, anytime that a writer giving you a tip that says, I like X, well, the question is, can you find a market segment that contradicts that I like X statement? Usually the answer is yes, right? And here's the other thing, is that a lot of these like personal preferences that Lily has are treated very dogmatically. Like, there's no argument. I am right, everyone else is wrong, and this is how it is. And again, that's not the form of a tip. That's the form of a rule, right? A tip is general and preferential, whereas a rule is specific and dogmatic. And one of the things that's worth noting is that if Lily Orchard and people like her are going to start treating, and I mean, start is the wrong word. If these people are going to treat particular socio-political positions as dogma, then they really shouldn't be surprised when some people try to subvert that dogma, right? This has been done with people, and while you do often suffer some slings and arrows for subverting popular dogma, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it, right? I've never read any of Salman Rushdie's work, but and so I can't say whether I like it or not, but whether or not you like Salman Rushdie's work, what he did, the results and the consequences of it were pretty significant for him, and that came from challenging a particular dogma. It's not like he's an unpopular author. He's a very well-known and well-accorded author by certain groups of people. I'm sure that I could come up with other examples if I sat and thought about it for a long time, but like, John Milton, right? Like, Paradise Lost is not an expression of the Bible. It's a story created using the Bible as a framework, and it'd be reasonable for people at the same time that John Milton was writing to say, well, this is blasphemous. If you're going to, dogma are great things to blaspheme against, honestly, as a writer. It can provide you with a good motivation, and it can provide you with like actual pushback, which can provide you with more inspiration. And it can be and if it's something that you really care about, something that you really believe in, and you think that the prevailing dogma is wrong, then by all means go through and poke at it and determine whether you're right or you're wrong. The important part is that when you put it into a story or an article or an essay or whatever it is that you do with it, that you treat the opposition with I mean, I wouldn't even necessarily say like dignity or respect. Those aren't quite the right words, but like seriously, right? To not make your opponent a caricature, because that's not going to be convincing to anybody. And if you're poking at a particularly popular dogma, then you might find that having a one-dimensional or caricature version of that dogma will make whatever you're doing very unconvincing, not just to the people that believe in the dogma, but to people who are on the fence. So, and with that, you see that I'm giving you a tip, right? This is a tip. And the thing about the tip is that it's general. It applies to a wide variety of things. If you're going to poke at a dogma, make sure that you, and I don't say what dogma, it could be a dogma that I believe in, right? Hypothetically. If you're going to poke at any dogma, even ones that I like, or even ones that I don't like, I would prefer that you would, that you would treat the opposition with some seriousness, with a little bit of gravity, with a little bit of realism, because otherwise it'll be unrealistic. And you can kind of rationalize out why that works, why that makes sense, right? As opposed to me saying, do this because I say so. I'm giving you an argument, not a statement of the masquerading as fact, right? Rules are facts, tips are opinions. I just came up with that now, so maybe we can maybe if I thought about that more, I could hack at it a little bit. But like that's kind of the air of these things, right? And so what I'm going to note in closing is that when you're looking for writing advice or when you're looking for recommendations about works as a reader, as a watcher of television shows, or a listener to music, listen for general advice, general ideas about what's going on, right? If someone gives you some general ideas about plotting or character development, well, that's more likely to be useful than highly specific advice for plotting and character development, because specific advice in those cases is usually like an expression of preference, right? I have some notes. I'm sorry, I'm looking at these, but expressions of preference. For instance, a writer expressing a preference in writing is irrelevant to another writer if the writer giving the specific advice is not representative of a significant segment of the market, or if you can find a large segment of the market that's contradictory, then that means that even if you break their advice, you're going to possibly have room in some segment of the market. And this is for if you're planning on writing something or creating something that you want lots of people to look at, right? Specific advice has its place. Grammar and syntax, and often word definitions are good places to get specific advice. If I tell you that none is actually a singular, right? And so your verb after none should be singular. That's very specific advice, but it's helpful because it does describe how the English language tends to work. You can break that specific advice. You could say none of us runs to the store, or none of us. I'm kind of going off the top of my head here, trying to think of a good example. But this is a common thing, is that people will write, "None of us have this," or when it should be "None of us has this." And of course, these are things that you can break. But if you break, and that's one that you can probably break with a pretty decent amount of impunity. So maybe it's not a great example, but what's a more basic grammar rule? How to do plurals would be, a syntax rule, right? If the plural of deer is deer, or the plural of sock is socks, if you write sockses, right, people are gonna be like, what's this person doing? If you pervade your story with non-standard grammatical constructions, that can work sometimes, but oftentimes what happens is it kicks the reader in the head a little bit, and it makes them go wait, what's going on here? That's what happened to me with the second part of Dragonwing, was that they kept throwing in all these weird baby word terms that I was like, what's going on here? Why are you calling this whistle like a hoot whistle? There's no reason to add the extra word to it. I don't know. I guess the point here is that there are places where there's a constructive way or like there's a constructive sense in which certain things are tips and certain things are rules. If you're going to write tips, write them as tips. Don't write them as rules. If you write rules and then say these are just tips, lol, that's as disingenuous as saying a bunch of judgmental things about something and saying, well, this is just my opinion. If you're not willing to back it up with like some ideas of like, well, here's my evidence in favor of my evaluation of this particular work, then, well, I mean, opinions are like what's. Everybody has one. Whereas sometimes in certain structural things, you want specific advice. You want to know exactly how to do the plural for a word. You want to know exactly how to conjugate a particular verb. You want to know the most basic example is how to spell things, right? English, if you look at like stuff that was written in like the 1700s, spelling was not very standardized at that point, and it makes things hard to read. Nowadays, spelling is fairly well standardized in English, at least. So, like, you don't want to spell things wrong in your story. If you do that a lot, people will pick up on it. If you've watched any of my book reviews, you'll know that's like one of the things that I pick up on. Is like, this is spelled wrong. This is a typo. This is wrong. This is the wrong word. And it's one of those things that damages immersion in reading, for instance, or even watching a show, right? Like, if just to make a humorous example, if you were watching a TV show and a bear walked into frame, and they're like, look at that dog over there, you'd be like, what? And unless it was played off as some kind of comedic thing, which you could do. I've seen YouTube videos where like a little kid is like, can I pet that dog? And it's a bear. The mom's like, no. So, anyway, Fruits of a Rotten Orchard, Wordy Pair episode, pretty funny. My soul leaves my body at about Rule 33, and I am desperately trying to get out of there. I don't know if we're going to go back and do more of those because they were pretty awful. But like, there are structural rules as to what makes a tip versus a rule, and it's really bad to write a bunch of things called tips, frame them as rules, and then say tips not rules lulz at the very end, as if you're like tricking someone. If you're gonna give someone advice, don't try to trick them. That's stupid. And like these 101 tips are pretty stupid, which is why they got a massive amount of pushback and were eventually deleted. Fortunately, Imgur remembers all. Well, everything that people put up there. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Hope you enjoyed. If you are still here and you're liking what I'm doing and you want to support the channel, you know how to do that. If you really like what I'm doing, then you can go check out some of my books. There are samples up on Amazon, all that good stuff. Or your particular ebook seller of choice. Links in the description, etc., etc., etc. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, and I will see you tomorrow with. I think I'm going to talk about this because I read this and I want to get it off my chest. It wasn't bad. It was a little non-standard, and I wouldn't call it like great or good even necessarily, but it told a story, and when I thought it was going to be annoying, it didn't. It decided not to be so annoying. So yeah, thanks again, and I will see you tomorrow. Have a good one.